"You're protecting the wrong person," Marcus Reed said. His voice calm but sharp enough to slice through the low hum of conversation, and for a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to pause as if the air itself had taken notice. But William Carter didn't pause, he didn't question. He didn't even look twice. Instead, the billionaire's expression hardened, his jaw tightening as he lowered his glass slowly, the amber liquid catching the chandelier light like something expensive and untouchable. "I don't make mistakes like that," William replied, his tone cool, practiced, the kind of certainty that came from years of control, from a life where every decision had a price tag and every risk was calculated. And yet, as the words left his mouth, Marcus didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't plead his case. He just held William's gaze for one steady second longer than most people dared, then let the silence answer for him. Around them, guests shifted subtly, silk dresses brushing against polished marble, the soft clink of glasses returning as if nothing had happened. But something had, even if only one man could feel it. William turned slightly, already dismissing the moment, already moving on, because that's what powerful men did. They decided what mattered and what didn't, and a stranger in a wrinkled suit wasn't supposed to matter. Not here, not tonight, not at a gala where every detail had been curated down to the placement of each candle. But as William stepped away, something lingered, not in the room, but in his mind, a small irritation, a thread he couldn't quite cut. Behind him, Marcus remained still, his eyes no longer on William, but scanning the room with quiet precision, not searching for approval, not seeking attention, but watching, observing, as if he were waiting for something no one else could see. And then his gaze landed, just briefly, on Claire Donovan, standing near the far end of the room, her silver gown catching the light, her posture flawless, her smile effortless. She looked exactly like she belonged beside a man like William, elegant, composed, untouchable, and yet, for the smallest fraction of a second, her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass, a movement so subtle it would have been invisible to anyone not paying attention. But Marcus noticed. He noticed everything, across the room. Claire felt it too, that flicker of being seen, and her smile adjusted, just slightly, smoothing over something that had almost slipped. William reached her moments later, placing a hand lightly at her back, grounding himself in what he understood, in what made sense. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, reserved only. For her, Claire nodded, her eyes warm, reassuring. "Of course," she said, but her gaze drifted for just a heartbeat, not toward Marcus, but toward the hallway leading to William's private office, a place no guest had access to, a place no one should be near tonight. And then she looked back at William as if nothing had happened, as if the moment had never existed. But the thread tightened again, unseen, unresolved, and across the room, Marcus exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if confirming something he had feared. His shoulders squared, not with tension, but with decision, and without drawing attention. He began to move, not toward the exit where he had been told to go, but deeper into the room, blending into the crowd with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where he needed to be. Because whatever William Carter believed in that moment, whatever certainty he held onto, it was already beginning to crack, and he just didn't know it yet. The music returned, softer now, like the room was trying to convince itself nothing had shifted. But William Carter did not feel the same rhythm anymore. Something subtle had lodged itself beneath his confidence, not enough to alarm him, just enough to irritate, like a word on the tip of his tongue he could not quite recall. He adjusted his cufflinks, the platinum catching the light, a habit he used to reset control. Across from him, Claire Donovan smiled at a passing guest, her laugh light, effortless, the kind that fit perfectly into rooms like this, rooms built on reputation and image. Yet even as she spoke, her attention flickered, brief and precise, toward the corridor leading to the private office, and this time, William noticed, not fully, not consciously, but enough that his gaze followed for a second longer than necessary. "You seem distracted," he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough curiosity to test the air. Claire turned back instantly, her expression softening. "Just making sure everything is going smoothly," she replied, her hand resting lightly against his arm, grounding, familiar, practiced. William nodded. That answer made sense. Everything about Claire always made sense. That was why he trusted her, why he had chosen her, because she fit into his world without friction, without questions, without uncertainty, and yet, as he glanced past her again, he caught a glimpse of movement that did not belong. Marcus Reed, still inside, moving through the crowd with deliberate calm, not hurried, not nervous, just present, like he had every right to be there. William's jaw tightened slightly, irritation sharpening into something more focused. He had already handled this. He had made a decision, and yet the man refused to disappear. "Excuse me?" William said, his tone polite but firm, already stepping away before Claire could respond. His stride controlled as he crossed the marble floor, weaving through clusters of guests who instinctively made space for him, because that was what power did. It parted rooms without asking. He reached Marcus near the edge of the ballroom, where the light dimmed just enough to soften details. "I thought I made myself clear," William said, his voice low, measured, but carrying authority that did not need to rise. Marcus turned slowly, meeting his gaze again, steady, unshaken. "You did," Marcus answered. "You just did not understand what you were deciding." The words landed differently this time, not confrontational, not defensive, just factual, and somehow that made them harder to dismiss. William exhaled through his nose, patience thinning. "You are out of place here," he said, each word precise. "And whatever you think you saw, or think you know, it does not concern you." Marcus's expression did not change, but his eyes shifted briefly past William, toward the corridor again, then back. "It concerns you," he said quietly, "whether you believe it or not." For a second, neither man spoke, the noise of the room fading into the background as if distance had formed around them. William studied him now, really studied him, the calm posture, the lack of desperation, the absence of any attempt to impress or manipulate. It did not match the story William had already written in his mind, and that mismatch pressed against his certainty in a way he did not like. "You have 1 minute," William said finally, the decision coming out, sharper than he intended. "Say whatever it is you think matters, and then you leave." Marcus nodded once, not grateful, not relieved, just accepting the window he had been given. "The woman you trust," he began, his voice steady, "has already moved something into your office tonight." William's eyes narrowed slightly, instinct pushing back, but Marcus continued before he could interrupt. "I am not asking you to trust me," he added. "I am asking you to look." The simplicity of it hung there, heavier than any accusation, and somewhere behind them, unnoticed by most, Claire Donovan turned her head just enough to confirm whether anyone was watching. William Carter did not move right away, and that was the first crack, not in his composure, but in the certainty that had always guided him, because men like him did not hesitate. They acted, they decided, they controlled outcomes before doubt had the chance to form. Yet now, standing under the softened glow of chandeliers and distant music, he found himself doing something unfamiliar. He was considering, not believing, not trusting, just considering, and that alone was enough to shift the balance of the moment. His eyes held Marcus Reed's for a fraction longer, searching for something he could dismiss, a tell, a weakness, an inconsistency, but Marcus offered none. There was no urgency in him, no attempt to persuade, only a quiet steadiness that felt out of place in a room built on performance. "You expect me to walk away from my own event because of a story?" William said finally, his voice lower now, less about authority and more about control. Marcus shook his head slightly. "I expect you to verify what is already happening," he replied, his tone unchanged. "You do not need me for that." The words landed with an unsettling simplicity, because they did not demand trust, they demanded action, and action was something William understood. Behind them, laughter rose briefly from a nearby group, glasses clinked. A server passed carrying a tray of champagne. The world continued exactly as it should, but William no longer felt aligned with it. His attention pulled toward the corridor again, toward the private office that held more than just paperwork. It held leverage, contracts, decisions that shaped entire industries, and the idea that something had been placed there without his knowledge pressed against his instincts in a way he could not ignore. He turned slightly, just enough to look, just enough to confirm the hallway was still as it had been moments ago. Empty, quiet, untouched. "You see," William said, a faint edge returning to his voice as he gestured subtly. "Nothing is happening." But Marcus did not follow his gesture, did not look. Instead he remained focused on William. "You are looking at the wrong moment," Marcus said. "You need to look at what already happened." And for the first time, something sharper than irritation flickered in William's expression, because that distinction mattered. It suggested timing, planning, intention, things that could not be dismissed as coincidence. His mind moved quickly now, recalibrating, replaying the last hour, who had access, who had moved freely, who had reason, and before he could stop it, one image surfaced: Claire, near the corridor, her glance, brief but precise, and the way her fingers had tightened around the glass. So subtle it had almost disappeared. Almost. William straightened slightly, his posture shifting from dismissal to awareness, not fully convinced, but no longer certain, and certainty was the foundation he built everything on. "Stay here," he said, the words coming out before he fully decided on them. Not a request, not an order, something in between. Marcus gave a small nod, not agreeing, not resisting, simply acknowledging, as if he had expected this step all along. William turned and began walking, not rushing, not drawing attention, but with purpose, his path cutting cleanly through the room, past conversations and laughter that now felt distant, irrelevant. The corridor grew closer, the lighting dimmer, the air quieter, and with each step, the space between what he believed and what might be real narrowed. Behind him, Marcus remained where he was, but his eyes shifted, tracking not William, but the movement at the far end of the room, where Claire Donovan had just set her glass down and begun to move as well, not toward the exit, not toward the guests, but toward the same corridor. Her pace measured, her expression unchanged, as if nothing at all had shifted, and yet everything had. The corridor felt different the moment William Carter stepped into it, the music from the ballroom fading behind him until it became nothing more than a distant echo, replaced by the quiet hum of air conditioning and the faint tick of a wall clock that suddenly sounded louder than it should. His footsteps slowed without him meaning them to, not out of fear, but out of something far more unfamiliar: uncertainty, the kind that did not belong in his world, the kind he had spent decades eliminating. The door to his private office stood ahead, closed, unchanged, exactly as it had been when he last left it, and for a brief second, that sight almost reassured him, almost convinced him that everything Marcus Reed had said was nothing more than an intrusion, a disruption he could correct with a simple decision. But then he remembered the words, not a demand for trust, just a suggestion to look, and that suggestion lingered like a challenge he could not ignore. His hand reached the handle, cool, metal under his fingers, and he paused, just long enough to register the silence around him. No footsteps, no voices, no sign that anyone else had followed, or at least, none that he could hear. He pushed the door open slowly, the soft click of the latch sounding sharper than expected. Inside, the room greeted him with the same polished order he had left behind, the wide oak desk, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, the neatly arranged folders aligned with precision, everything exactly where it should be, exactly how he required it, and yet something felt off, not visibly, not immediately, but subtly, like a note in a song played slightly out of tune. William stepped inside, closing the door behind him, his eyes scanning the space with a sharper focus now, not as a host, not as a man in control of an event, but as someone verifying, confirming, testing reality against doubt. He moved toward the desk, his fingers brushing lightly across the surface, smooth, undisturbed, no visible sign of intrusion. His gaze shifted to the shelves, the framed photographs, the documents, all intact, all familiar, and for a moment, he exhaled, the tension loosening just slightly. Perhaps he had allowed a stranger's words to disrupt his judgment. Perhaps this was nothing more than a miscalculation he could correct by returning to the ballroom and restoring order. But then his eyes stopped, not on something obvious, but on something almost invisible, a small object resting near the edge of his desk, something that had not been there before. It was subtle, easy to overlook. A slim metallic device no larger than a pen cap, positioned with deliberate care, as if it belonged, as if it had always been part of the room. William's breath slowed, his focus narrowing, the earlier irritation gone now, replaced by something sharper, more precise, recognition, not of the object itself, but of what it represented: intention, planning, access. His hand hovered above it, not touching, not yet, his mind moving through possibilities. How long had it been there? Who had placed it? What did it do? And more importantly, why here, why now? The silence in the room deepened, pressing against him as if waiting for his next move. And then, just as his fingers began to lower, a soft sound reached him from behind, the faintest shift of air near the door, not loud, not sudden, but enough to signal he was no longer alone. William straightened slightly, his hand withdrawing from the device. As his attention shifted, and in the reflection of the glass window ahead, he saw her, Claire Donovan, standing just inside the doorway, her posture composed, her expression calm, as if she had simply come to check on him, as if nothing about this moment was unusual. But her eyes were not on him. They were on the desk, on the object he had just noticed, and in that reflection, without a single word spoken, William understood something he had never prepared for, that the person he trusted most in this room might be the one he understood the least. William Carter did not turn immediately. He did not need to. The reflection in the glass had already told him everything he needed to know. Not the full truth, not yet, but enough to feel the shift, the subtle fracture in the version of reality he had trusted just minutes ago. His posture remained steady, controlled, the way it always was in high-stakes moments, but inside, something recalibrated, fast, precise, the same instinct that had built his empire now redirecting itself towards something far more personal. "You should not be in here," he said quietly, his voice even, almost casual, as if this were nothing more than a boundary being reinforced. Behind him, Claire Donovan stepped further into the room, the soft click of her heels measured, unhurried, confident. "I could say the same to you," she replied gently, her tone warm, familiar, the same tone that had reassured him countless times before, but now, it felt different, not wrong, just layered, like a performance he had watched too many times without noticing the script. William's eyes remained on the reflection, watching not her face, but her movements, the slight angle of her shoulders, the way her gaze stayed fixed on the desk, not on him, not on his reaction, but on the object resting near his hand, and that detail settled deeper than anything she could have said. "What is it?" he asked, finally turning now, slowly, deliberately, his eyes locking onto hers, searching, measuring, not accusing, not yet. Claire's smile did not falter, it never did. "Just something that does not belong here," she answered, stepping closer, her hand lifting slightly as if to reach for the device, then pausing as if waiting for his permission, as if this were still his space. His decision, William did not move. His hand remained near the object, not touching but claiming its position. "That is exactly what I was thinking," he said, and for the first time, there was a hint of something else in his voice, not anger, not doubt, but awareness. Claire tilted her head slightly, studying him now, as if reassessing something she had already assumed. "Then you should let me take care of it?" she said softly, and there it was, the smallest shift, not in her words, but in the intent behind them, a suggestion framed as help, a solution offered too quickly, too smoothly. William's gaze dropped briefly to the device, then back to her, the silence between them stretching, not empty, but filled with unspoken calculations, and somewhere in that silence, Marcus Reed's voice echoed again in his mind. "You are protecting the wrong person." The thought landed heavier now, not as a warning, but as a possibility, and William Carter did not ignore possibilities. He built strategies around them. "No," he said finally, the word simple, firm, not raised, but immovable. Claire's expression held, still composed, still calm, but something flickered beneath it, something that did not belong to the version of her he thought he knew. "William," she began, her tone softening, almost persuasive. "This is not something you need to concern yourself with." But that only confirmed it, the phrasing, the distance, the subtle attempt to guide him away, not protect him, but redirect him, and William stepped closer to the desk, closing the space between himself and the object, his hand lowering, not touching it yet, but making it clear it was no longer hers to manage. "Everything in this room concerns me," he said, his voice steady, grounded in a certainty that had returned, not the blind certainty from before, but something sharper, more deliberate. Claire's eyes held his for a second longer than necessary, and in that moment, the room shifted again, not in sound, not in light, but in truth, something unspoken passing between them, something that could not be undone. And just outside the closed door, unseen by both of them, Marcus Reed stood in the quiet corridor. Not moving, not intervening, just listening, waiting, because he knew this moment did not belong to him. It belonged to the man who had to decide whether to keep believing what was easy or start seeing what was real. William Carter let the silence stretch, not out of hesitation, but control, the kind that forced the truth to reveal itself without being chased. His fingers finally closing around the small metallic device, lifting it just enough to feel its weight, light, precise, intentional, not something accidental, not something forgotten, something placed, something meant. Claire Donovan's eyes followed the movement, not sharply, not with urgency, but with a focus she could no longer disguise, and that alone told him more than any explanation could have. "It is not dangerous," she said softly, stepping closer, her voice calm, reassuring, the same tone she had used 100 times before. But now William heard it differently, not as comfort, but as direction, as guidance toward a conclusion she wanted him to reach, and that realization shifted everything. He turned the device slightly between his fingers, examining it without touching any part that might activate it. His mind already mapping. Possibilities, recording, transmitting, interfering, none of them harmless, none of them belonging in his office without his knowledge. "Then why is it here?" he asked, his voice low, measured, no longer testing, now observing. Claire paused, just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough to confirm that her answer would not be immediate, not instinctive, and that delay was louder than any denial. "Because someone wanted it here," she replied finally, her tone steady, but now there was something else beneath it, something that did not quite align with the image she had maintained all night, something closer to calculation. William's gaze lifted to meet hers, holding it, searching deeper now, beyond the surface, beyond the familiarity, into something he had never needed to question before, and in that moment, he saw it, not clearly, not completely, but enough to know that the version of Claire he trusted was only part of the truth. "And that someone is you," he said, not as an accusation, not raised, not sharp, but certain, the kind of certainty that did not need proof because it had already connected the pieces. Claire did not react immediately. She did not deny it. She did not step back, instead she held his gaze, her expression composed, almost thoughtful, as if she were deciding how much of the truth he deserved, or perhaps how much he was ready to hear. "You were not supposed to find it this way," she said quietly, and that was enough, the confirmation settling into the room like a weight that could not be ignored. William's grip on the device tightened slightly, not out of anger, but focus, the situation no longer abstract, no longer hypothetical, now real, now present, now his. "What does it do?" he asked, and for the first time, Claire's smile did not return, her expression shifting into something more direct, more honest, not softer, not kinder, just real. "It listens," she said, "and it records everything that matters." The words were simple, but the meaning behind them stretched far beyond the room, beyond the night, into deals, decisions, conversations that could reshape everything he had built. William's mind moved quickly, faster than the tension, faster than the moment, mapping out consequences, access, timelines, and then one final piece fell into place. Marcus Reed, his warning, his presence, his refusal to leave, and suddenly the man William had dismissed made sense in a way nothing else did, not as a threat, but as a variable he had failed to account for. "He knew," William said quietly, almost to himself, and Claire's eyes flickered, just once, enough to confirm it. Outside the door, Marcus stood still, hearing the shift in tone, the change in rhythm, knowing that the moment had arrived, not the end, not the resolution, but the point where truth could no longer be ignored. And inside the office, William Carter made a decision, not about the device, not about Claire, but about something far more dangerous. He chose to believe what he was seeing, even if it meant everything he trusted had just changed. William Carter did not lower the device. He did not set it aside. Instead, he held it between his fingers as if its weight alone could anchor the moment in something real, something undeniable, the silence. In the room no longer felt empty but charged, like every second now carried consequence. His eyes stayed on Claire Donovan, not with anger, not with disbelief, but with a clarity that had replaced both. "How long?" he asked, the question simple, direct, not emotional, but precise, because time mattered, Time meant planning, access, opportunity, and Claire understood that immediately. Her gaze did not drop, did not avoid his. "Long enough?" she replied, her voice steady, no longer soft, no longer wrapped in reassurance. Now it carried something else, something closer to truth, and that truth did not need decoration. William nodded once, absorbing it, calculating, his mind already moving beyond the question itself into the implications. The meetings, the private conversations, the decisions made within these walls, all of it potentially exposed, all of it no longer contained. And who else? He continued, not raising his voice, not stepping forward, but narrowing the focus. Because this was no longer about betrayal alone, it was about scale. Claire's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something more controlled. "You already know the answer to that," she said, and he did, not names, not yet, but the pattern, the intention, the reason someone would place a listening device in the office of a man like him. Leverage, influence, power redirected. William exhaled slowly, the sound quiet but deliberate, his grip on the device loosening just enough to shift it in his hand, not discarding it, but understanding it. And then, without warning, he did something Claire had not expected. He walked past her, not toward the door, not away from the situation, but deeper into the room, toward the panel near the far wall. His movements calm, controlled, purposeful. Claire turned slightly, watching him now, not interrupting, not stopping him, just observing, as if recalculating her own position in real time. William reached the panel and pressed a sequence. Only he knew, the soft click of hidden locks engaging echoing faintly. And in that moment, the room changed, not visibly, but functionally sealed, contained, isolated from the rest of the house. "No one is leaving, until I understand everything," he said, his voice even, carrying the authority that had built empires, but now grounded in something more personal, more immediate. Claire's posture shifted just slightly, not in fear, but in acknowledgement, as if she had anticipated resistance, but not this level of control. "You are already behind?" she said quietly, and this time, there was no softness at all, only fact. William turned back toward her, his expression unchanged, but his eyes sharper now, more focused. "Then I suggest you start explaining," he replied, and for a brief moment, neither of them moved, the distance between them no longer measured in steps, but in truth, and outside the closed door, Marcus Reed stood still, listening to the shift in tone, the change in balance, knowing that the line had been crossed, that this was no longer a misunderstanding, no longer a warning, but a confrontation that could not be undone. And inside the office, Claire took a slow breath, not to steady herself, but to decide what version of the truth she was about to reveal, because whatever she said next would not just change William Carter's night, it would change everything he believed about the world he thought he controlled. Claire Donovan did not rush to speak, and that silence, deliberate and measured, carried more weight than any immediate denial could have. She stepped further into the room, closing the distance not as someone cornered, but as someone who had already accepted the shape of the moment, her heels soft against the polished floor, her posture still composed, still precise, but no longer pretending. "You always believed control meant ownership," she said quietly, her voice steady, no longer wrapped in warmth, now stripped down to something clearer, sharper. William Carter did not interrupt, did not react outwardly, but his attention sharpened, every word now data, every pause information. "You built systems that listened, tracked, predicted," Claire continued, her gaze steady on him. "And you trusted them more than you trusted people." The observation landed without accusation, without emotion, just fact, and that made it harder to reject. William's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in recognition, because she was not wrong. His world had always been built on knowing before others did, on controlling variables before they became risks. "So someone decided to apply that same logic to you," she added, her eyes flickering briefly to the device still in his hand, and that was the moment the pattern completed, not just betrayal but symmetry. Someone had studied him, understood him, mirrored him, and inserted themselves into his blind spot. "You are not answering my question," William said, his voice calm but firmer now, grounding the conversation back into structure, back into control. Claire inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the shift. "I am," she replied, "just not in the way you expect." and for a second, the air between them tightened again, not with uncertainty, but with inevitability. "This was never about just you," she continued, her tone measured. "It is about everything connected to you, your decisions, your influence, the people who follow your lead without ever questioning why." William's gaze did not waver, but something deeper shifted, because this was no longer a simple act of deception. This was layered, intentional, strategic. "And you?" he said. "Where do you fit into that?" Claire's expression changed then, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who did not know her, but to William, it was unmistakable, the absence of the version of her he thought he understood, replaced by something more complete, more real. "I was the access point," she said simply, and the clarity of it removed any remaining doubt. No excuses, no deflection, just truth. William exhaled slowly, his grip on the device loosening slightly as the weight of the situation settled fully into place. And then, almost without thinking, his mind returned to Marcus Reed, the man outside this room, the one variable he had dismissed too quickly. "He interrupted your plan," William said, more statement than question. Claire's eyes shifted just slightly, enough to confirm it. "He complicated it," she replied, and there was the smallest trace of something else in her tone now. Not frustration, not fear, but respect, reluctant, but real. "He was not supposed to be here tonight," she added, and William nodded once, the pieces aligning now with a precision he understood. Not emotionally, not yet, but strategically, and that was enough for the moment. "Then I suppose we both underestimated him," William said quietly, and for the first time since entering the room, there was a shift in power that neither of them could ignore, because the man outside the door, the one William had tried to remove, had already changed the outcome simply by refusing to leave, and inside the sealed office, the silence returned, heavier now, not empty, but filled with the realization that the situation had moved beyond control, beyond planning, into something far more dangerous, truth that could no longer be contained, and for William Carter, that truth was no longer something he could afford to ignore. William Carter did not respond right away, not because he did not understand, but because he finally did, and understanding, real understanding, required a different kind of silence, the kind that stripped away assumptions and left only what could be proven, what could be acted on. His eyes shifted briefly to the device still resting in his hand, then back to Claire Donovan, no longer searching for who she had been, but focusing on who she was in this moment. "Who are you working for?" he asked. The question direct, clean, not emotional, because emotion would not give him the answers he needed. Claire did not look away, did not hesitate, but she did not answer immediately either, and that pause again carried meaning. "If I tell you that," she said quietly, "it changes more than just tonight." William nodded once, accepting that without reaction, because everything had already changed, whether spoken or not. "It already has," he replied, and the certainty in his voice was different. Now, no longer rooted in control but in clarity, Claire studied him for a moment, as if measuring whether he had truly crossed that line, whether he had moved from assumption to awareness, and then she exhaled softly, not in defeat, but in decision. "You were never the target," she said, and that shifted the frame entirely, not removing him from the equation, but redefining his position within it. William's gaze sharpened, recalculating instantly. "Then what was?" he asked, and Claire's eyes flickered, not toward him this time, but toward the device. "Access?" she answered. "Not just to your conversations, but to the network around you, the deals you shape, the people who trust your judgment without ever seeing the full picture." William absorbed that, not as information alone, but as structure, a system built around influence, around leverage that extended far beyond a single room, and for the first time, he saw the scale not as something he controlled, but something that had been quietly observing him, mapping him, using him. "And you were going to let it continue," he said, and this time there was the faintest edge in his voice, not anger, but recognition of the cost. Claire did not deny it. "Until it was complete," she said simply, and there was no apology in it, no justification, just truth, and that truth landed heavier than anything else she had said, because it meant this had never been temporary, never incidental. It had been designed to run its course regardless of him, regardless of what he believed. The silence returned again, But it was different now, not uncertain, not tense, but decisive, the kind that precedes action. William's hand lowered slightly, placing the device back on the desk, not as surrender, but as repositioning, as if acknowledging that the object was no longer the center of the situation. "Then you miscalculated one thing," he said, his voice steady, grounded. Claire tilted her head slightly, waiting. "What is that?" she asked, and for the first time, William allowed the smallest shift in his expression. Not a smile, not satisfaction, but something closer to resolve. "You assumed I would not look," he said, and that was the moment the balance shifted again. Not dramatically, not visibly, but fundamentally, because everything Claire had built, every layer of access and control, depended on him staying exactly who he had been before tonight, predictable, confident, dismissive of anything that did not fit his expectations, and now that version of him was gone, replaced by something sharper, something more dangerous, awareness. Outside the door, Marcus Reed stood still, listening to the rhythm of the voices inside. Not the words, but the pauses, the shifts, the subtle changes that signaled movement, progress. He did not move, did not intervene, because he understood something William was only now beginning to grasp. That this was not about stopping a single action. It was about seeing the system behind it, and inside the office, Claire's eyes held William's for a moment longer, and in that silence, she realized it too. That the man she had planned around was no longer the man standing in front of her, and that changed everything. William Carter did not look away. Not now. Not after everything had aligned with a clarity he could no longer ignore. The room felt smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way truth compresses space, leaving no room for illusion to breathe. Claire Donovan stood across from him, composed as ever. But the balance had shifted, not entirely, not decisively, but enough that neither of them could pretend otherwise. "Then what do you do now?" she asked quietly, her tone measured, not challenging, not uncertain, but genuinely assessing, because this was the moment her entire plan had anticipated. The moment where he would either revert to who he had been, or become something else entirely. William did not answer immediately, his gaze drifting for just a second to the device on the desk, then past it, beyond it, as if seeing not the object itself, but everything it represented, every conversation it had captured, every decision it had touched, every unseen hand that had been shaping outcomes alongside him, and then his attention shifted again, not to Claire, but to the door, to the man standing just beyond it. Marcus Reed, the variable he had dismissed, the one element that had not followed the pattern. "I start by correcting a mistake," William said finally, his voice steady, grounded, not raised, but absolute. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in recalculation, because that was not the answer she had expected, not fully, not yet. "And what mistake is that?" she asked, and William turned toward the door without hesitation. His steps measured, deliberate, each one carrying the weight of a decision that could not be undone. "The one where I chose not to listen," he replied, and with that, he reached for the handle, unlocking the door with a quiet click that seemed louder than it should have, the barrier between the room and the corridor dissolving in a single motion. And there, exactly where he had been all along, stood Marcus Reed, calm, still, watching, not with anticipation, not with urgency, but with the same steady presence that had carried him through every moment of this night. William paused for a fraction of a second, not out of doubt, but acknowledgement, the kind that does not need words to be understood. "You knew?" William said, his voice lower now, not confrontational, not defensive, just direct. Marcus met his gaze without hesitation. "I saw enough to know something was wrong," he answered, and there was no satisfaction in his tone, no sense of victory, only clarity, the same clarity William now shared. "And you stayed," William added, and Marcus nodded once. "Because you were not seeing it?" he said simply, and that was the truth of it, stripped of ego, stripped of judgment, just fact. William exhaled slowly, the weight of that realization settling fully now, not as regret, but as correction. He stepped aside slightly, opening the space, not as an invitation, but as a recognition. "Then come in," he said, and for the first time that night, the line between them shifted, not erased, but redrawn. Marcus moved forward without hesitation, crossing the threshold into the office with quiet confidence. His presence no longer out of place, no longer dismissed, but acknowledged. Behind him, the door remained open, the connection between the room and the world outside no longer sealed, no longer controlled, and inside, Claire watched the exchange in silence, her expression unchanged on the surface, but her eyes sharper now, more focused, because this was the moment she had not planned for, not fully, not completely, the moment where two perspectives she had accounted for separately had aligned, and alignment was far more dangerous than resistance. William turned back toward her, no longer alone in the room, no longer isolated within his own understanding. "Now," he said, his voice steady, carrying the authority of someone who had finally chosen to see everything in front of him. "You are going to explain all of it." And the silence that followed was not empty, not uncertain, but charged with something new, something irreversible, because for the first time, the truth was no longer hidden, and it was no longer his alone to face. Claire Donovan did not look at Marcus Reed when he entered, not immediately. Her attention remained fixed on William Carter, because he was still the center of the system she had built around, still the axis everything turned on. But something had changed, not just in him, but in the space between them. "You are making this more complicated than it needs to be," she said quietly, her tone measured, controlled, but no longer persuasive. Now it carried something closer to urgency, not panic, not fear, just awareness that the situation was shifting beyond her design. William did not respond, not yet. His eyes remained on her, steady, unblinking, but his posture had shifted slightly, no longer angled toward control, now aligned with something else, clarity shared, not held alone. Marcus stepped further into the room, not intruding, not asserting, just present. His gaze moving once across the desk, the device, the positioning, the distance between them, reading the room the way he had. Read it from the beginning. "It is not just about listening," Marcus said quietly, his voice calm, deliberate, and for the first time, Claire's attention shifted to him fully, not dismissive, not overlooking, but assessing, because now he was no longer an interruption, he was part of the equation. "Then say what it is about," William said, not turning, but allowing the space for it, allowing the truth to come from more than one direction. Marcus did not hesitate. "It is about timing," he said, his eyes moving briefly to the device, then back to Claire. "That kind of device does not just collect information, it transmits it at specific moments, moments that matter." The words landed with precision, not speculation, not guesswork, but experience, and Claire's expression tightened, just slightly, enough to confirm he was not wrong. "And tonight matters," Marcus added, and that was the point where everything aligned, the gala, the guests, the conversations happening just beyond these walls, deals being discussed, decisions being hinted at, connections being made, all of it flowing through a network that could be captured, redirected, used. William's mind moved quickly, mapping the implications, not just exposure, but leverage in real time, influence applied at the exact moment it would have the greatest impact. "You were not just listening," William said, his voice lower now, more focused. "You were positioning outcomes." Claire did not deny it, she did not deflect, she simply held his gaze, and that was answer enough. The silence that followed was no longer uncertain, it was complete, the truth fully present, no longer hidden behind implication or suggestion. And for the first time since the night began, William Carter saw the full structure of what had been built around him. Not just the device, not just Claire, but the system behind it, the intention, the reach, and more importantly, the gap that had allowed it to exist, his own certainty, his own pattern of trusting what fit and dismissing what did not. He exhaled slowly, the sound quiet but deliberate, grounding the moment. "Then it ends now," he said, not loudly, not forcefully, but with a finality that did not require volume. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in calculation. "You think it is that simple?" she asked, and there was something new in her tone now, not confidence, not control, but recognition that the outcome was no longer hers alone to determine. William did not look away, did not reconsider. "No," he replied. "I think it is already too late for simple," and that was the truth none of them could avoid. Not him, not her, not Marcus, because what had been set in motion extended beyond this room, beyond this night, but something had changed, something fundamental, the moment where one man stopped looking away and chose to see everything in front of him. And that moment, more than any plan, more than any device, was the one variable no one had accounted for. And now it was the one thing that could change everything. William Carter did not raise his voice, did not reach for control in the way he once would have. Instead, he stepped closer to the desk and placed the device down with deliberate precision, as if acknowledging that it was no longer the center of the moment. The real shift had already happened. His gaze moved from Claire Donovan to Marcus Reed and back again, not dividing them, but connecting what they each represented, deception and truth colliding in the same space. Then we stop it before it finishes, William said, his tone steady, not driven by urgency but by decision, the kind that did not depend on emotion but on clarity. Claire watched him carefully now, her posture still composed but no longer relaxed, the confidence she carried earlier replaced by calculation that had to adjust in real time. "You cannot stop something you do not fully understand," she replied, her voice calm but edged with reality, and she was not wrong, not entirely. William understood that. But understanding did not always require complete information. Sometimes it required action at the right moment. "I do not need to understand all of it," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I only need to disrupt the part that matters right now." Marcus shifted slightly where he stood, not stepping forward, not interrupting, but his presence anchored the direction of the conversation. "She is right about one thing," Marcus said quietly, both of them turning toward him. "It is already in motion. Whatever is being collected is not staying here." His gaze flicked briefly to the device, then back to William. "Which means the question is not what it does, but where it sends it." That thought settled heavily into the room, expanding the scale beyond the walls, beyond the house, into something wider, something that could already be reaching beyond their control. William absorbed that quickly, his mind adjusting, shifting from confrontation to strategy. "Then we trace it," he said, the words. Immediate, decisive. Claire's lips curved. Slightly, not into a smile, but into recognition. "You assume it is that simple?" she said again. But this time there was less certainty behind it, less control, because now the pattern had been broken. William shook his head slightly. "No," he replied. "I assume nothing is simple anymore." And that was the difference. The man standing here was no longer relying on assumptions, he was reacting to reality. Marcus stepped closer to the desk now. His movements measured, careful, not touching anything yet, just observing. "If it transmits on a schedule, then there is a window," he said. "A moment where it activates, where it connects." William nodded, already following the logic. "And if we find that moment," he added, "we can interrupt it." Claire's eyes moved between them, tracking the shift, the alignment forming that she had not anticipated, not because they trusted each other fully, but because they were now seeing the same problem from the same angle, and that was more dangerous than trust. "You are both underestimating how far this reaches," she said, and for the first time, there was something closer to warning in her tone, not for herself, but for them. William met her gaze steadily. "Then you should start telling me exactly how far," he said, and the silence that followed carried weight again, not hesitation, but choice. Claire looked at the device, then back at William, and something in her expression shifted. Not surrender, not defeat, but recognition. That the situation had moved beyond control, that the outcome was no longer something she could fully direct. "There is a signal relay," she said finally, her voice quieter now, more direct. "Not here, not in this building, but close enough to receive and redirect." Marcus's attention sharpened immediately. "How close?" he asked, and Claire hesitated just long enough to confirm the importance of the answer. "Within a quarter mile," she said, and that changed everything, because it meant the system was not distant, not abstract. It was near, active, reachable. William exhaled slowly, the plan forming in his mind not as theory, but as action. "Then we still have time," he said, and for the first time that night, the direction shifted away from what had already been done and toward what could still be changed. And in that moment, the three of them stood in the same room, bound not by trust, not by agreement, but by a single realization that whatever had been set in motion was not finished yet, and that meant it could still be stopped. William Carter did not hesitate this time, the moment Claire Donovan said, "Within a quarter mile." Something inside him locked into place, not panic, not fear, but direction, the kind that came when uncertainty finally gave way to action. He reached for his phone but stopped midway, lowering his hand again as the thought completed itself. This was not something he could outsource, not something he could delegate to people who would ask questions, delay, or worse, alert the wrong attention. His eyes moved to Marcus Reed, steady, direct, no longer guarded. "You know what to look for?" William said, Not as a question, but as acknowledgement. Marcus met his gaze without hesitation. I know what patterns to follow, he replied, calm, precise, already thinking ahead, already mapping possibilities beyond the room. William nodded once, the decision final, then turned back to Claire. If you are wrong about the distance, he said quietly, this ends differently. Claire did not flinch, did not defend herself. She simply held his gaze. I am not wrong, she answered, and there was no performance left in her voice now, only fact, the kind that did not need to convince, only to be acted on. The silence between them shifted one last time. No longer a standoff, no longer a negotiation, but a transition. William stepped past the desk, moving toward the door again, but this time with intention that extended beyond the room, beyond the house. Marcus followed without needing to be told, his movements smooth, purposeful, already aligned with the direction William had chosen. And behind them, Claire remained still for a moment, watching, not with regret, not with resistance, but with something closer to recognition, because she understood what they were about to do, and more importantly, what it meant if they succeeded. If you find it, she said, quietly, stopping them just before they reached the threshold, both men pausing without turning. It will not just expose them, she continued. It will expose everything connected to you. William's hand rested on the door, his posture still, considering, not the warning itself, but what it implied, the scale, the reach, the cost, and then, slowly, he turned his head just enough to meet her gaze again. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Then it was never really mine to control, he said. And with that, he opened the door, the corridor beyond stretching out in quiet contrast to the noise still echoing faintly from the ballroom. The world continuing as if nothing had changed. Even though everything had, Marcus stepped forward beside him. The two of them now moving in the same direction, not as allies built on trust, but on shared clarity, and that was enough. Their footsteps steady against the polished floor as they moved away from the office, away from the illusion of control that had defined the night, toward something real, something uncertain, something that could not be predicted or contained. Behind them, the door remained open, and Claire Donovan stood in the quiet space they had left behind, her eyes fixed on the empty hallway, the faintest shift in her expression finally appearing. Not defeat, not victory, but something unresolved, because she knew something they did not, or perhaps something they were only beginning to understand, that whatever they found out there, whatever signal they chased, whatever truth they uncovered, it would not end with stopping a single device. It would lead deeper, further, into a system far larger than any one person, any one decision. And as William Carter and Marcus Reed disappeared down the corridor, the distance between who they had been at the start of the night and who they were becoming now stretched wider with every step, and somewhere beyond the walls of the estate, within that quarter-mile radius, something unseen continued to operate, still active, still transmitting, still waiting, as if the real story had only just begun.